Okay, good evening. To begin with, long before you remember Bob the Builder and his mantra and his team, can we do it? Yes, we can. And long before Barack Obama borrowed from him and he won the election to become the first black president of the United States of America, my dad taught me one of life's most important lessons. My dad is in the 80s now. He just had an operation for cancer, and I dedicate this talk to him. He taught me this lesson. He bought me a yo-yo when I was a kid, and I just couldn't play this yo-yo. I just couldn't get it. And I said, "Oh, Dad, I can't do it. I can't do it." He made me get a dictionary, and he made me open up to the word cat. C-A-N with a hyphen and a T. And he said, check out the meaning. And it says, see can. There is no meaning for the word can't. So he says, there's no meaning for the word can. You can do it. And believe it or not, I was going to bring my yo-yo along, but I didn't. I went on to become the regional yo-yo champion. Nowadays, I try to teach my son, I have a 7-year-old son, to play the yo-yo. And he just can't do it. And I try and try and try. There's no dictionary these days, so he goes to his app, his iPad, and he says, there must be some app that's going to teach me how to play this. And there is no app. All right? And along the way, he found this for me. A person who says it cannot be done should not interrupt the person doing it. This is my 7-year-old son. He's telling me something, or he has my sense of humor, I don't know. But the point that I'm trying to get tonight is that not one person, everyone can. We all have the ability to do it. Now, I grew up in South Africa. I'm South African. I grew up in Apartheid, South Africa. You pronounce it here in the United States of America as Apartheid. The proper pronunciation is Apartheid. That's the way we grew up. Apartheid was basically, we had 4 race groups in South Africa. We had the black race, the white race, the Indian race, and the colored race. And we were all kept apart, and there were all kinds of rules to keep us apart and restrict you. And I grew up in this rule-based fascist society. And that's why I learned to bend the rules. The trick about bending the rules is, if you bend too much, you break it, then you committed a crime. Then you're in big shit. Right? But if you bend just enough, you can get away with it. That's the whole point, and it requires a lot of creativity. I'll tell you some stories as we go along about bending the rules. I was talking to my mom before I came here, and she said, what are you going to the States to do? I said, I'm going to be talking about one person can make a difference by bending the rules, and she cracked this up. And she reminded me about a story, and she says, you know, Raf, you were born to bend rules. And she told me about a story, and I forgot this, but it all came back. I was a kid, and every year this was before I went to grade 1, we used to have a school sports day. There'd be athletics, track events, all kinds of stuff. And there was this one event, it was called the bun and treacle race. There'd be a pole, just imagine this, a pole on this side, and on strings would be hanging a bun with treacle on it, this sticky treacle. And as kids their hands would be tied behind their backs, they'd run up to it, and then go down on the knees and try and eat this bun. And the string would move around, it would mess your face up. I mean, this is cruelty to children. It would be bad. This was done every year. Grade 1, it was my turn. And I came along, and guess what I did? I bit the string off. And the bun fell down, I ate the bun and won the race. And my mom says, you know, you bend the rule, they stop the race after that. Okay, talking about bending the rules, there's the whole question of disobedience in the eyes of anyone who has read history, humanity's original virtue. It's through disobedience that progress has been made, through disobedience and through rebellion. And this was said by Oscar Wilde. Now, I grew up in this apartheid society as a rebel, disobedient, but stretching it just enough not to break the rules, but to bend it. But here it started with this man. I was born in the same city where it started with him, the city of Pietermaritzburg. In the city of Pietermaritzburg, Mahatma Gandhi came to South Africa to fight a case for an Indian businessman in South Africa. In that city, he was kicked out of a train because it was for the white race. And he couldn't sit in a coach for first-class citizens. In that very same station is a story in my book, where years later, as a teenager, I couldn't buy a cup of coffee in the middle of winter because the person would only serve the white race. So that's the significance. And he didn't bend the rules. He rebelled, he started a whole rebellion, and we know it's history what happened. Then there's the question of being. We all want to be something. Now in South Africa, the laws and the rules said, you're born Indian, you will go to an Indian school, you will marry an Indian woman, you will do this, you will do that, and there were all these rules. And I said, no ways am I going to do this. And that's where the bending came from. Okay, the bending continues even till today. I'll tell you a story most recently. I went with my wife and son to Cyprus for a summer holiday. And we went up to one of these water parks where you climb up, you go right up to the top and you come down the slides. And there was a big rule there. If you have a swimming trunk with a zip in the back, you cannot go down. So I looked at the guy and I said, why can't I go down? He says, that's the rule. I said, okay, rules for me. If I go down, I'll rip my ass off. With the zip. So I said, okay, what happens now? Okay, you have to go down and buy a pair of trunks without a zip for 20 euros and then come back. No ways I'm going to do that. So I saw he had a towel there. I said, can I borrow your towel? Took his towel, put it around me, dropped my trunks, turned it around, bent the rules, went down. Everybody was borrowing his towel after. So it works. Now I'm telling you these stories, personal stories. I'll continue and tell you more stories. This is about my life's journey. As Brian told you, my book encapsulates most of the stories, but I'll tell you a few stories, especially about, I was a cricketer. I don't know who knows about the game of cricket. Okay, that's the game of cricket. My book's titled, Ye Shall Bowl on Grass. Now, it's a metaphor for freedom. In South Africa, there was I as a kid. I was born, I wanted to play cricket. I was born to play cricket. But the rules said only the white man can bowl on grass. Nobody else can bowl on grass, nobody else can do this. And I'll go just to a few more slides. There was a high school. So, Indian teacher. I went to high school only with Indians. There was I playing cricket. This was my problem. I was playing ball. This changed. Something happened, and this is where, let me relate this story. It's in my book. There was pressure on the South African government from the world outside. South Africa is still today the #1 cricket team in the world. And the white man loved the game of cricket. So there's pressure from the outside to not let South African teams come along and play in different countries, especially the Commonwealth countries. So the government relented. And they said, okay, we can now play race against race. So the white race can play against the black race and the Asian race and the colored race, but you can't mix the teams. And I happened to be the first person of color to bowl to a white man in South Africa. And it was the first time I bowled on grass. So I came along and I bowled, and it was a really bad ball. So my captain, who was an Indian who had played cricket in the UK, came up to me and he said, Rap, that was terrible. And I said, hey, don't bowl on grass before, I smoked the stuff. There's a difference. So anyway, what happened then is, why I bring this Playboy thing about, I was about 20 years old then. I was the youngest professional cricketer in my country. At 17, I was playing professional cricket. I went to the government had opened up the cricket grounds where you could sit wherever you want to sit. So a friend and I went along to sit and watch a game. But the teams were still white. But at one of the breaks, I wanted to buy some beer. And the guy refused to serve me the beer. because the liquor laws where only the white man could be served beer, nobody else. So I made a big story about it and I walked away. So there was this girl who was, woman, she took my money and the guy suddenly gave me the beer and I said, no, ladies, my money is not acceptable from my hands, but acceptable from your hand. To hell with all you guys. And that's when I decided you cannot play normal sport in an abnormal society. I sacrificed my cricket career for that. So we all gave up playing cricket with the white man. And if you go back to the history of South Africa, cricket and the sports boycott, which are non-violent means of resistance, made a serious impact on the South African government, and they changed. And what happened with me, personally, the woman bought the beer with her money, and what started off was a whole relationship which was against the law, and I went to prison for that. And that's all in my book. Okay, let's move on. Then I went to university. Now, according to the law, according to the rules, I had to go to an Indian university. But this is where I bent the rules. I had to apply to the Minister of Police and justify with the Minister of Police why I needed to go to a white university. So I said I want to study a black language, Zulu, which was not offered at my Indian university. So I got permission to go to a white university from the Minister of Police, and a black lecturer was teaching this language at a white university. Crazy. Anyway, I landed at this university, and it gets even more crazier. South Africa had relations at that stage with the Shah of Iran. There were Iranian students on the campus who were darker than me. They were honorary whites. South Africa had relations with Taiwan. Taiwanese were honorary whites, but mainland Chinese were not. They were Indian or Asian. Now, while at university, something else happened. I ended up managing a rock band. I started a radio station on campus. My university was called Natal University. We called the radio station NUTS, Natal University Transmission Services. We started a radio station on campus. I managed a rock band on campus. And at the end, this rock band we bent all the rules. I took the rock band to play to a white audience, a black audience, Asian audience, colored audience. We even went to I have some stories. We went to a coal mine and played on a coal mine where black coal miners were suddenly entertained by white rock musicians. Never happened in the history of South Africa. That all led me then to the music business. Post-university, I studied English and philosophy as my majors. Landed up in the music business, and I wanted to use music as a means to bring people together. And it started, there was I in Johannesburg, and we did some amazing things bringing people together with music. But I'll tell you one particular story. There are plenty of stories to tell. One particular story of significance. Sitting in my office one day, two colored guys walk in with their guitars, and they say they want to sing. And I said, okay, go ahead and sing. And they start, get down on it. I said, get the hell out of here. And they said, why? I said, why do you have to sing Kool and the Gang's music? Why can't you sing your own music? And then suddenly they started singing their own compositions. And I said, wow, these guys have talent. So we took on these two guys. The name was Wayne and Vic. And we formed a band around them, and we worked with them to cut a single. And then one night, something strange happened. The biggest nightclub in Johannesburg, Plum Crazy, the band that we supplied there, bailed out at the last minute. So the manager calls me, Raf, we have a serious problem. We don't have a band tonight. I said, listen, I have a colored black band, but that's against the law. I said, anyway, you play black music, black American music, and white people dance to that, so come on, there's some faces. I convinced him, and he says, okay, I'm bending the rules, but the guys shouldn't be doing drugs, I don't want to get the police, or whatever. I said, okay, I'll make sure everything's cool. So Wayne and Vic go along, and they play a Plum Crazy. They start off with cover versions, and then they play their own stuff. And wow, the crowd goes crazy. They forget the band is black. They just enjoyed the music. And a bit of that story is there in my book. At the end of the day, end of the evening, at the early hours of the morning, they ended up staying at my place. Now let me fast forward. Years later, the year 2001, I was South Africa's ambassador. I had come back to South Africa I was ambassador in Abu Dhabi. I had come back to South Africa. I was head of the North African desk. I flew into Cairo. Our ambassador in Cairo picked me up at the airport, took me to a 5-star hotel, and we're going up in the elevator. And guess what I see? The band that's playing in the hotel is Wayne and Vic. And I tell the ambassador, wow, I don't believe this. This is what I started these guys off. I bent the rules and started these guys off, and they're playing in Cairo's 5-star hotel tonight. Anyway, that night, I waited and I walked into this nightclub, and they were playing. And in the middle of the song, Wayne stops. And he says, I can't believe it. The man that bent the rules to start us off is here. And everybody's like, just stopped. And, when we spoke after, they couldn't believe that I had become an ambassador. But I was glad that by bending the rules, I changed their lives, and they had cracked it. They had made it. Then I moved on from, talking about the music business. While I worked in the music business, I worked with a band called Juluka. Juluka was headed by Johnny Clegg. Johnny Clegg was a white Jewish South African guy, an anthropology lecturer at Wits University in Johannesburg. He met this black guy from my hometown, Sipho Mkhulu, and Johnny and Sipho became very good friends, and they created a crossover sound. Now, not many people know that Michael Jackson once had to cancel a concert in Paris because Juluka outsold him. Fact, right? Now, you've never heard of Juluka. Let me give you a hint of what Juluka is all about. I quit the music business simply because my principles and what I was working for and the capitalist nature of the business, we clashed. When I quit the music business, I became a student at the Leadership Institute of South Africa. I started my MBA. It's not an MBA in South Africa, it's an MBL. The emphasis is more on leadership. I started that program. And that took me to the Outward Bound program in Lesotho, which was an interesting experience for me. Lesotho is a country on the borders of South Africa. So the rules of South Africa, apartheid rules, don't really apply in Lesotho. I went on this program on an experiment. What happens is different companies, organizations, take their leadership potential guys, bring them on this program. It's in the mountains, and you work as a team, and your leadership stuff and all that. And I wanted to bend a few rules to see how blacks and whites could coexist. And I bent many, many rules on this. For example, I confronted the leaders of the program. They would make you abseil down a mountain and then tell you to come up the mountain. And it was my turn, I abseiled, and I looked up and I asked the guy, now what's the point of the exercise? You've got to get back up. And I found the easiest route back. Nobody challenged them on these rules. Various rules, finally I was kicked out of the program. When I got kicked out of the program, I had my black brothers, they quit in solidarity with me. And the next thing I had the security police all over me as well in South Africa. Okay, moving on. Then I joined the radio. I got my first real job, forget the music business, I started working on radio. Let me tell you a bit about this. In South Africa, we were living in apartheid South Africa. Why I have to tell you this, what led to this? A South African Jewish guy by the name of Izzy Kirsch and his brother Nati Kirsch started a radio station in South Africa called Radio Truro. Because they found a gap, a radio station for the Indian people. So they started a radio station not from South Africa, from Swaziland, broadcasting from Swaziland directed to the Indians of South Africa. And they did extremely well. So the South African government then started an Indian radio station and knocked them out. And I worked on this Indian radio station. Then I quit the radio station. Lots of things happened. I want to move on to this. And I joined the diplomatic service as South Africa's first diplomat of color. And my first diplomatic posting was in Beverly Hills. I bent every rule in the book. For example, one of the rules, if there's a demonstration outside the consulate, the police come along and you do not get involved with the demonstration. We had a demonstration, and 2 Hollywood stars were there, Olivia Newton-John and Goldie Hawn. And I looked at that and I said, okay, and the demonstration was about South Africa were cutting seals of an island, and they didn't want this. So I broke the rule, I bent the rules, I walked out and went up to them. And they said, no way, you can't be a diplomat there, it's only white people. I said, I'm the first person of color. And I said, listen here, we're cutting the seals because the seal population has become so big and the whole ecosystem has lost its balance. And it's not a case of we just cutting seals. When it comes to conservation, South Africa is one of the leading countries in the world. Anyway, by bending the rules, I got into the A-list of the Hollywood parties. Okay, talking about while I was there, let me point out to something here. We're talking 1988. He predicted the phased release of Nelson Mandela, and Nelson Mandela was released in phases. The world saw him coming out of prison, but he came out from Robben Island, he went to Paulsmoor toured home, and then he came out. So I had this vision about what was going to happen to South Africa, and that's the reason I got into it. Okay, I finished off in Beverly Hills, and I'm going to now tell you about, in diplomatic terms, Mission Impossible. Imagine this. The first Gulf War breaks out. The Saudis have closed off the airport in Jeddah. South Africa has no diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia. 310 South Africans are stuck all over in Saudi Arabia. All other countries have evacuated their nationals out of the country, and the South Africans are there. I just come back from Beverly Hills, and the minister called me and said, I don't care what it takes, what it costs, they're our people, you've got to get them out. The entire Department of Foreign Affairs laughed. To do an evacuation with a country with which you have no diplomatic relations, in the middle of a war, and we've never done an evacuation in our history. Mission impossible. And I bent every rule in the book and pulled it off. The major rule I bent is that, okay, I flew to London. And what happened in London? We arranged to the Americans and the British to get a plane to fly in and out. That was done. Then it was a question of a visa for me. If anything happened, at least I could get out, and I needed a diplomatic visa. Now that's asking for the impossible. To get a diplomatic visa from a country with which you have no diplomatic relations, forget it. Now how do I pull that off? I had at the time, he's now late, a very famous uncle. Maybe some of you might know, Sheikh Ahmed Didat was my mom's brother. So I called him up and I said, Uncle, can you help me? He said, all he had were the facts that he received from the Saudi foreign minister congratulating him for receiving a prize from the king. So he sent me the facts. I created a dummy fax to the Saudi foreign minister from my uncle requesting a visa for me. Then I go with the dummy fax and the fax to my uncle to the Saudi embassy in London. I go to the embassy and Scotland Yard's all around it. Okay, I show them my diplomatic passport, I get it. And then the guards won't let me in. But I show them the letter, the facts from their foreign minister to my uncle. And my uncle was very well respected in the entire Arab world. So the guy sees that, he's impressed. Okay, I get it. Then I tell the guy who's in charge of visas, this is who I am. Looks at it, wow. Okay, my uncle has asked your foreign minister for a visa for me. And if you don't give me the visa, I'll call my uncle, who'll then call your foreign minister, and your ass is history. But you've got to give him some space. So I said, I'll come back later for my visa. I go back later, I pick up the visa, and I go back to the embassy. It's a de facto recognition of South Africa. I got a diplomatic visa and a diplomatic passport. And I flew into Saudi Arabia. Flew into Saudi Arabia and on a plane, and it was quite an adventure. The Americans and the Allies gave us permission to fly where the Scuds were coming in from, because the rest of the airspace was covered. So we flew in quite at dangerous levels. I was the only passenger in the plane. We land. The airport control knew about this plane landing, but nobody knew about me disembarking. Then the fun started when I disembarked. I disembarked dressed in a pair of jeans, bag with some clothes, and a bag with $250,000 in cash, which was given to me by my government to help the people that are stranded. And imagine the Saudi police now grabs me. I look Arab, I don't speak Arabic, and I got $250,000 in cash. What the hell? I mean, it was a thing of, I had to use body language and all kinds of stuff to get out of that one. I got out of that one, got the people out, went back to South Africa with a plane load of people, landed up at the airport, totally exhausted. I was the national hero in the country, and all I said to the media was, the minister took a decision, I just implemented it. If anyone has to get credit for it, he has. Good night, I'm going to sleep. He watched it. Next day I was promoted to spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I was a spokesperson at the most crucial stage in South Africa's history. Mandela was released, the negotiations were taking place for a constitution, and there was I, the world's attention was on South Africa. And there was I talking to the world's media about what's happening. An amazing experience, and I have some stories in my book about that. I had this amazing relationship with extreme left-wing journalists who are critical of the country, and I operated as a spokesperson. I bent the one rule. Ask any spokesperson, he'll tell you, we issue press statements. I've never issued a press statement in my life. Because the moment you issue a statement, you kill the story. Everybody's got it. I used to play one off against the other. I'll give you an example. South Africa was to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And my Director General was flying to Vienna to sign it. The day before he left, I called the one media group, gave them the story. And I said, it's an exclusive. And then he flew off, but then that night, the second group, I got the two of them to fly off with him. So the next day, the one group breaks the story, and the second group gets the story on the spot. It's on both newspapers, major papers, it's a headline story. But a press statement loses it. Now that's bending the rules. Okay, continuing with cricket. After being a spokesperson, I landed up as Consul General of South Africa in Pakistan. And if I can just point there, this guy I played cricket with, an Indian guy by the name of Mustafa Khan, saying the story, he ended up being the manager of the South African cricket team. And there, I couldn't bowl on grass. I land up in Pakistan as the Consul General. He's the manager, an all-white cricket team comes along to play here. I mean, look at the amazing, movement. And then from there, I moved, from Pakistan, I moved as ambassador to the United Arab Emirates. And I can tell you one amazing story in the United Arab Emirates. I don't know how much you know about the United Arab Emirates. The rule is this, for any diplomat: you do not interfere in the laws of the country you're in. I went to Dubai to give a speech at a certain place. And I walked out from the speech, and the driver, the car was parked outside with the flag, and the driver tells me, "Sir, there's some girls from South Africa and they want to talk to you." And these two girls come along and they cry. And I said, "Listen, I'm not going to talk in the street here. Let's go to a coffee store or something." And we sit there, and this is their story. And people in Dubai is, or the United Arab Emirates is a unique country. 20% of the population is local, 80% are foreigners who come along and work in the Emirates. And all the foreigners that come to work come on visas and they sponsor. It's almost like a slave-like existence. So these girls were recruited from South African hotels. They were brought in, and when they arrived, the guys wanted to, have a good time with them, and the girls refused. And their passports were being held by the owners of the hotel. They had signed agreements in Arabic, and they were living like slaves unless they gave in, and that's it. So they approached my head of administration at the embassy, who told them the rule says we do not interfere in the domestic affairs of the host country. So I called him and I said, "Bro, is this true?" He said, "Yeah, there's nothing we can do about it." I said, "Listen, they're my people, they're my citizens. And the human rights of 10 South African women are being abused here. No way, so I'm going to bend the rules." And I bent the rules. I went to the management of the hotel, I threatened them that I'm going to go to the media and make a big story about this. And guess what? They were all released. They got their full salaries because I had a great relationship with the leadership, with the ruler of Dubai. Thanks to my uncle, my late uncle. And they got their full contract and they were all sent back home. But before they went, they took me out to dinner. I can tell you, in the UAE or United Arab Emirates, bent many, many, many rules in the diplomatic business, but I'll move on. There was I, as South Africa's ambassador, with the captain of the South African cricket team. One of the greatest moments in my life was meeting Nelson Mandela. I never met him, he was always in prison. The year was 1995. I was the South African ambassador in Abu Dhabi. He came on an official trip, and then this was in Dubai. What an amazing personality, what an amazing person. And I have a story in my book, how Nelson Mandela made me give up smoking. Never smoked since my meeting with him. Okay, let me move on to just a minute. Let me just talk about this. I showed you a clip of Jaluka, right? Years later, this is now post-apartheid. Nelson Mandela is president. I'm moving quite fast just to show you, how things have changed. Jaluka, we're playing on stage, and you'll see the rest.
30 years ago, in 1986, Africa was in a state of emergency, and it was a very intense cultural struggle that was being waged. And we were part of that, and this is a song that we wrote for truly one of the greatest South Africans in history, Nelson Mandela, and we'd like to open the show tonight with a tribute to him. Thank you. God bless you. Thank you.
It is music and dancing that makes me at peace with the world.